Hi, good morning. I normally give a 3-minute grace just to allow people to come in. So everyone, thank you for joining on time or a little bit ahead of time. So just give 3 more minutes. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us on this wonderful Friday. Today, we have a wonderful conversation, and this is part of our Gold Leaf Compliance Toolbox series. And as you know, our Toolbox series focuses on professional development and real-world career insights. Now, thus far, we have been demonstrating and inviting persons to look at our training series. Today is my first session where we're looking at our careers in compliance. And this was created to demonstrate pathways, challenges, and opportunities in the compliance field for people who are already in the field and people who are also very new. I'm happy to say that I do have some students from my last UE chats on campus, and I'm happy that some have come over so that we can share with them what compliance is about. Today, I am genuinely very happy to welcome Shanae. Shanae Reimer is our very first Gold Leaf Compliance, Careers and Compliance interviewee. Now, who is Shanae? Most of you may know. Shanae is a seasoned compliance and risk management professional with over a decade of experience in AML, CFT, and regulatory governance. As the Director of Compliance at Harney's Fiduciary, she leads initiatives to strengthen risk-based frameworks and ensures regulatory alignment across the Americas and other jurisdictions. This is why I'm very excited to chat with her to figure out how she's doing it all. Her career began in 2016 as Deputy Compliance Officer, but prior to that, she was actually at the BVI FIA. When she began as Deputy Compliance Officer, this began through her dedication and technical excellence, which allowed her to progress to Compliance Officer and later Head of Compliance Americas. In these roles, she helps transform compliance processes, implement enhanced monitoring systems, and support the development of stronger financial crime prevention frameworks. Shanae holds multiple professional certifications. She was named Compliance Officer of the Year by BVI Finance in 2019, and she remains deeply committed to mentoring emerging professionals and supporting the growth of a robust compliance culture in the BVI. I'll also add that Shanae is also up for Compliance Officer of the Year again in 2025, and also the Rising Star of the Year award with BVI Finance. As I've mentioned, I'm genuinely excited to interview Shanae. As a young professional who has built an impressive and accelerated career path, her journey offers valuable insights for both newcomers and seasoned practitioners. So Shanae's story is exactly the kind of experience that I hope to showcase, and this is where we're starting today. Hi, Shanae. Thank you for joining.
Hi, Shamini. Thank you for having me.
Okay.
And thank you to
Mhm.
everyone else for joining as well.
Wonderful. So where we're going to start, because we have a very mixed room. As I've mentioned, we have persons who may not know what compliance is. I've also had people who reached out to me and said, hey, I've done the introductory course for compliance, so I think I like it. I need to know more about it. And then we have seasoned professionals. And again, this is why showcasing your journey is so important, because you've gone through it all, including developing teams. So I think the best starting point for us to launch off of would be for you to maybe describe to us in simple language, because I'm sure you do this for all your newcomers. What is compliance?
So I could understand why the word compliance might be unclear to some. Honestly, I was in that same position about 11 years ago when I got a call from the FIA asking me to help with a short project reviewing compliance manuals. And fresh out of university, I was like, what is a compliance manual? But fast forward to today, I'd sum up compliance to say it's simply following the rules that apply to your business. But when you take that word in the context of financial services, it means understanding and applying the laws that govern us. It means maintaining registers, submitting annual reports to the regulator, reporting any concerns that you have to the regulator when necessary, and of course, continuous staff training. But I'll say in recent years as well, compliance has grown into a vital role and a demand career path in the BVI. And I really do hope that more persons continue to see its importance and actually as a career choice.
Okay, that's excellent. And I would say, I think, the BVI, we're seeing a lot more movement with this, with industry initiatives, having the RMI sessions on compliance. And I'm happy to see that there is also being taught at HLSCC. I do look forward to one day, probably, if maybe even in the primary school levels, we have more substantive compliance discourse. Now you've grown from an examiner to compliance officer to now director of compliance, leading global teams. What are some of the key moments, decisions, or even mindset shifts that helped you move forward along that path? And I'd just like to pause before I allow you to answer to say that, within the industry, what most persons may be familiar with, you've heard the word a KYC analyst and then compliance officer or MLRO. And I think for a lot of people, that has become somewhat of a ceiling. After compliance officer, maybe head of compliance, if that existed in their firm. But now we're seeing it going into the C-suite. And that's a really remarkable achievement. So tell me, what is that comparing it to your examination days at the FIA?
Okay, so I'd say that's an interesting one because I often reflect on my career journeys over the weekends, and I think that there were a lot of moments that stood out and helped me to move from point A to B. So I'll start off by saying one of the biggest lessons I learned was the importance of not giving up, even when things felt challenging or seemed impossible. Now, this is a bit of a personal story, but I remember my first few months on the regulated side of the industry. I was a complete novice at best, and one day I was feeling overwhelmed, and I walked into my boss's office and I cried. I cried my tears out, and I said to her, I don't know anything, and I don't know what you're asking me to do. And she said, Hello, how long have you been here? It's only been 3 weeks. But that moment changed everything for me. And it was in that moment that I realized that being vulnerable helps us to uncover just how strong we really are. So from that day on, I made a mental decision to learn everything I thought I did not know. And that meant countless hours of reading something 2 to 3 times to make sure that I understood it, making notes about everything, going home after work, rereading and rereading my notes until I understood. And I think that experience also helped me to understand the importance of why. And I find that it is actually one of the most critical questions in this field, and a question that I ask myself daily, and I encourage my team to never be afraid to ask. Another key reflection for me was accepting that I'm a human being, and human and perfections cannot exist in the same sentence. I used to tend to be a perfectionist until I learned that. And I've learned the importance of growing from mistakes and understanding that shortcomings are just as valuable as your successes. And I think I see myself as a continuous learner. I don't stop learning. I learn from my mentors, my peers, the experience of others. And you realize that you don't have to make mistakes yourselves in order to learn a lesson. So I think a lot of things that have gotten me from examiner to compliance officer to director is also about being open to constructive feedback, listening to encouragement, knowing when to pivot have all been really essential parts of my journey. And it's about falling down because I have fell down, knowing how long to stay down, and then knowing when to get back up. Um, and other things that have been instrumental in my personal and professional growth is actually understanding the value of relationships. In compliance, we're often seen as a business stoppers. We're here to stop business. But I've made a conscious effort to change that narrative and really focus on the business itself and demonstrate to the business how compliance is not a back office function. We're not after the fact, but we're a partner in its success. And I think working alongside the business, not always being the one to call out their wrongdoing, really helps to ensure sustainability. And there's so many career paths that one can go. As you mentioned, compliance analysts, and people tend to think that there's a ceiling, but you can go all the way to be a chief governance and risk compliance officer. And I really think when you get into compliance, it's really understanding which roles are suitable for you because you can focus on AML. There's regulatory compliance, there's AML managers, persons with compliance background, if you like internal auditing. So, one of the things I always tell people is first decide if you like the field, and if you like the field, then determine which way you want to go. Some persons want to be compliance officers, but not everybody wants to be a compliance officer. Persons want to be risk managers. Um, you could be a compliance analyst, junior compliance analyst, assistant compliance managers, and each of those roles are uniquely different. Usually, junior compliance analysts, they do KYC reviews, and some firms are structured differently. I know that in particular entities, persons within the compliance function focus on a particular task, so they have a niche area, whether that's looking at the documentation or just doing the screening. Whereas in other firms, I could speak to Harney's really well. We train our staff to look at the full end-to-end process. So they're mini compliance officers and they're doing everything. So as I said, there's so many career paths that one could explore, but I think one of the most important questions to ask yourself is, do you like the field first, and then explore its opportunities?
So I'm going to throw something out here. You gave so many golden nuggets here. And I just want to reinforce a few. Even at, and I don't want to say my stage of the career because I still feel there are many days, and you and I have discussed this, with the evolving landscape where I feel whiplash, and also questioning, things that should be basic. And I think I have an opening line to those people that I could reach out to, one of whom is Shanae, where I start off. I know this man, I know we always teach people to not say this. I know this may sound like a silly question, but to be honest, most times a client has thrown this and I am now doubting myself. Like I know the answer, it should be so simple. But this is the thing with compliance, you're getting the business lines throwing, little wrenches at you, the directors, everybody, because everybody also wants, or they're focusing on this goal as to how can we push this business. And this is why it's so important to have solid relationships, and solid relationships, one, where you get reinforcement, or two, where you can just have that sort of discussion and leave maybe not realizing you did not interpret something correctly, or you got another interpretation which can help your case. So I find, again, even at this stage for compliance professionals, and it's something I found existed when I began compliance in the BVI years ago, that I feel has gotten lost. But there was a bit more of a camaraderie. There was a bit more, at the time I could call up to three people I could think off the top of my head to get different interpretations and different perspectives. And this is something I want us to encourage people to do. They're different persons at different levels in their career, that you can reach out to them and understand, well, this is how this firm does something for this reason. Because also remember, it's a risk-based approach. So why they're doing something may be different to why you're doing something, but it allows that understanding and that discussion. So I really want to encourage us to try to get back to those days of promoting that type of relationship. You also said something, many things that were important, but what I want to look at is that when you fall, getting back up. And I'm not sure if there's any, example that you may want to give, or how it impacted you, when you fell. And just before you start, I'll give a quick one. And I remember the year, it was 2015. Not saying I've not made other mistakes from that, but it was around the time of the introducer relationships. And I missed something. And I remember I took it so hard. I thought it was the end of the world. It was the end of my career. And I remember my director at the time, like, are you serious? Like, you are human. And I remember one of the key things he said, with what you've been carrying, like with what's happening in the industry, the fact that this is not even a slip, it's like a little bear scenario, bear slip, that the place has not exploded because, compliance press officers have to carry so much. Like, you should be happy. And I was so surprised. Not everybody may have gotten that sort of environment where that would be a response. But I could tell you, before that was said, it was debilitating for me, because it was also coming from a perfectionist mindset. And the legislation changes so much, it's so hard to stay abreast. So I'd be happy if you could share with us maybe some more on a moment where you fell.
Sure. I'd say when I joined Harney's, I started off as a deputy compliance officer. And as I said, I went into my boss's office at that time and I cried like a child. I cried like a child because I didn't know anything that she was asking me to do. And there were a lot of aspects within the role. A key one was leadership. And this was my first time supervising and managing people. And it was much, it was the most impactful learning experience that I've had in my journey. And throughout managing people, learning emotional intelligence, you make decisions and you go about a situation that's not necessarily the correct way to do so. And it's, in reflection or listening to the feedback of your own staff and what they have to say in terms of how they may feel or may have felt, sorry, that you've handled a situation, and realizing that, yes, I have some work to do, and knowing when to involve yourself within a situation. You have to know when to remove yourself, and then also have that balance of how to slowly trickle back in. So I would say some of my failures, or the majority, was me learning about leadership, for my own self, but also looking after the persons that I'm helping to mentor and also influence their own careers.
That's an excellent answer. And I do believe, this is also the challenge when you're now going from compliance analyst to compliance officer to compliance manager. And as that word represents manager, you're not only managing and overseeing the processes, you're overseeing the resources, the people element. And, I had to have my come to Jesus moment of I didn't go to school to learn how to manage people. It should feel like it comes natural. But when you have all of these other competing elements, as you said, it becomes challenging. So let's take that now from managing people to now at a board level. Something that I say to compliance personnel as well is there's a special soft skill that we need, not just in terms of managing people, but when we need to get our point across or when we need to get buy-in. And it's already challenging, let's say at a compliance officer manager level, as to you needing to know if it's the risk committee. My risk committee, they seem to be more by the book versus the board. I could maybe angle it and show them that if we don't do X, this is what it's going to cost you. Versus, other committees, they want to know where in the legislation does it say X. So you have to be always ready to pivot to know how to get your point across or get what you want. How do you now manage that at a board level?
I'd say it's understanding the needs of the business and having business acumen. I've had to learn that as a compliance professional, your role is not just to go in and tell the business this is all that you need to do and this is why you need to do it. And you have to take some time to understand the business model, the products and the services, its vision, and its strategy. And building your understanding the business, understanding its own risk tolerance, what it's willing to accept, what it's not willing to accept, and being able to demonstrate the value that compliance brings. And that means being able to clearly articulate to the board, um, all of the compliance risk and what may or may not be as what may or may not happen if these risks are realized. And I think once you can clearly articulate your reasoning to the board, show that there's been a lot of thought and analysis that has gone into it. And even if the board decides to say no, you would know that that decision is in they would know that your response or their decision is in well-grounded reasoning. I always tell persons that compliance, we're not there to say no. Our role, I think, is there to find the safest way to say yes, but you have to be commercial in that approach. Um, as I mentioned earlier, compliance is a cost center. It's not in most businesses a revenue generator, and it does not bring in any revenue to the company. So you always have to have that business acumen and that commercial mindset. And the approach always has to be this is how we're going to help the business achieve its objectives, and be able to clearly articulate that to your board.
That's excellent. And again, to the everybody on the call, because we have a varied group, um, you have to understand your business model and finding solutions. And that's what, you've really illustrated in your response, finding the solutions and focusing on protecting the business. I've seen different models or different styles of compliance where it's no reasoning. And that's then evolved to you also don't want to then be on the opposite side of just too relaxed. And I call that's where you're not doing effective compliance, where you may just say, well, I said they shouldn't. I wrote something to the board. There's an email record saying that you shouldn't, but and you still decided to go ahead. Well, I've done my part. We also can't take that backseat approach. So we need to spend time understanding how to present it to the board. Exactly as you've said, we're here to protect the business. If it is you want to do this decision, this is the risk-based approach. These are the things that may arise. And if they do, this is how we're going to control it. So with all of these things, what are some of the professional courses and certifications that you've taken that have contributed to where you are today? And you have done a lot. I don't know where you find the time, which we'll do. We don't worry, everyone. I have a question on a day in the life of.
Okay. I would say it's been a combination of both formal and informal learning experiences. And when I speak about formal, I'm referring to those professional certifications, ACAMS, ICA, CFE. So I would say it's been a combination of both formal and informal that have shaped my journey. I think the first thing is deciding which certification or course aligns with your career goal in compliance. If you decide that it's a field that you like, and I keep honing in on that because I think it's really important for persons that want to explore this field as a career, whether you truly like it. It is very demanding. It is very overwhelming at times. So once you've made that conscious decision that I want to do this and I want to continue to do this, then you need to determine what certification you want to focus on. And that could range from risk management, financial crime, regulatory compliance. I don't think it's a one size fits all approach. Personally, even though I started in a more senior role on the regulated side, I made it a mandate to be trained as if I were a junior staff member. So I told my superior at that time, you've brought me in as a deputy, but I want you to train me like a junior analyst. And I did that because I wanted to understand the technical details and the processes and the day-to-day challenges at every level of the function. And I think because of that hands-on learning, it really built a strong foundation for me and it helped me to lead with empathy and technical credibility. So I am one to roll up my sleeves and get my hands dirty. I could do the work that the team is doing, and I'm not afraid to do that. So, those informal learning experiences. And I think what has also helped has been those valuable learning experiences in terms of recognizing the importance of everyday learning. A powerful habit that I have developed is reading email trails, even those not directly related to my area of expertise. I think people underestimate how much institutional knowledge and practical insight you can gain from emails and understanding context, decision-making processes, and the nuances behind issues have all helped to make a distinction in my learning career, in addition to the relevant certifications that I've obtained over the years. So it's those things that I do on a daily basis that I think have really helped to make the world of difference.
I'll just pivot to that, what you do on a daily basis. So you were heading the Americas and now director of compliance where you have global teams. What is what does your day look like when it starts with different time zones, different client needs?
Well, my calendar doesn't belong to me. It belongs to everybody else but me. And no matter what I try to do to make time, everyone finds a flaw, and that is perfectly fine. But my days are dynamic, they're very demanding, and at times, I'll be honest, they could be overwhelming. But the passion makes it all worth the while. So, a typical day, somewhat hard to define, but a typical day includes meetings within the department, board meetings, participating in steering committee meetings, project discussions, engaging with third-party suppliers. Sometimes I'm giving compliance recommendations. We're working with internal and external auditors. I'm reviewing systems and processes. One of my personal favorite things to do is root cause analysis. The team would tell you if something is wrong, I want to know why it's wrong, how we got there, and how we're going to fix it, and have we involved the relevant stakeholders to fix it so that it doesn't happen again. Seasonally, so we've just come out of the hurricane season, so I'm involved in BCP, so business continuity planning, testing, we're doing simulation exercises. How are we going to respond if there is a hurricane or if there's a flood? Are staff prepared to work from home? So then I'm also involved in advising the business. I'm involved in HR matters, recruitment, training, drafting, reviewing policies and procedures. So it's dynamic, but a key to staying on top of it all is delegation. Delegation is key, and investing in your peers and your colleagues and your teams. My team, they step in, they show up, and they make sound decisions. And that's how I manage to stay on top of it all. I really cannot do it without them. And that has taught me that I don't need to be involved in everything. And that is why I've spent a lot of time training and empowering my team so that together we could do a lot more.
And when you look back to when you started your journey as started at Honey's and
Mhm.
where you are today, back then when you were crying in that office, did you envision where you're sitting today?
Not at all. And that's because I didn't even envision that I would be in compliance. Um, no, but I have learned that sometimes life has a greater call that one that we can expect, and that just like life, career paths are so unpredictable. And sometimes when you have that greater calling, you just have to answer. And when I got the call from FIA in 2014, it was a short stint on reviewing compliance manuals. And that stint is what has determined that stint of 3 months turned into 2 years. And that stint is what has led to my destiny and to where I am now.
So you could say you were a fall into you fell into compliance and then now you created your own path.
I did. And I always thought, so when I finished university, I thought I would stay in the mainland and I was going to work at one of those big financial firms and I was going to be an investment manager or financial broker. But, BVI is home. So it's not my birth home, but it is home because my family roots run deep here. So I came back to the BVI and said, I'm going to go into finance. Compliance was honestly the furthest thing from my mind. As I said, when they said compliance manual, what on earth was a compliance manual? So when I returned, fate had it to do otherwise. And I think that FIA opportunity, and I'll always give credit to it, shaped the course of my career and really has now defined my destiny. I love compliance. I'm so passionate about it. And this is what I want to continue to do, probably until I choose to retire.
That's excellent. So looking at your recognition and reflections with the passion that you have, as we mentioned earlier, in 2019, you were awarded the Compliance Officer of the Year award. And this year for BVI Finance, you're also nominated for the Compliance Officer of the Year, as well as Rising Star of the Year. And what do these recognitions mean to you?
So, one of my favorite books is Don't Sweat the Small Stuff, because it's all small stuff. And there's a version of it that speaks to personal life, and there's a version of it that speaks to professional life. And the professional version emphasizes about letting others have the glory and how important it is to let others have the glory. And that lesson has really stayed with me throughout my career. So for me, those recognitions have been incredibly humbling. I've never been someone who seeks praise or recognition, but I see them as reminders rather than rewards. And they remind me, most importantly, that young professionals like myself are making a real difference in our own countries and industries, and that we are we are part of the very generation that others once spoke about and hope would lead the way.
That is excellent. So I am now going to pivot into some questions looking at your for the seasoned compliance professionals, because again, you have a wealth of knowledge. And this is something that I want to encourage that we do where we're sharing. And this is something that's also important to you in terms of sharing that knowledge. What is some of the practical advice that you would give to professionals? Because I'm still struggling um, on how to stay on top of things. You know, when I come in, the emails, well, I use a focused inbox. So in the other for now, I'm seeing Royce's, I'm seeing ACAMS, I'm seeing, I sign up to a few sites with a lot of journals and I archive them for later. Doesn't happen. And, you know, it's just staying on top of things because in the compliance space, we need to stay on top of sanctions are happening, you know, then the sanctions are caused by so many various triggers that we want to, as best as we can, be ahead of what's happening. We want to see what's happening in the markets to see is it going to have an impact on products and services, how these are risk rated. And then just the technical knowledge side, things continue to evolve. You know, I just feel like I personally feel like I'm never doing enough. So this is very vulnerable moment. So share with us how do you tackle that?
I feel the same way too at times, but um, it's an interesting question because honestly, I still think that I'm a novice. It's only been 11 years. And those who have been in the industry longer than I have done an important role in paving the way for professionals like me. They are the foundation, and they've made it possible for my generation to explore this industry, especially compliance, an area that I think was at the back end for the industry for a very long time. So I'm not going to pretend like I have all the answers for the experienced professionals, but I'd say that my advice or perhaps my word of encouragement to them would be to continue to mentor and guide us. And when I say us, the new generation that's coming along, my generation, it's important that they share their experiences, they share their lessons, even their challenges, because then we could grow as a collective and the standards and the values that they have set could continue to go on for years to come. I'd also say to them, and if there are any on the call that are listening, is in order for them to stay on top of their work, they have to allow us to help them carry the baton, allow us to support you as, evolve as you balance evolving demands, allow us to help you with the new regulations and the change in expectations, and to have an open mindset to things like AI and to delegate effectively. And, I mean all of that when I say let us help you carry the baton. You don't have to do it on your own or by yourself. So sharing their knowledge and building stronger teams. Don't be a gatekeeper of everything. And I think when they empower us, so when you empower the younger generation, then all of us could stay on top of everything. And then you could find time to read the newsletters and deal with the evolving demands.
And in terms of newsletters, are there any ones that you have found are really helpful? Because again, you're managing so many different regions. So are there any key newsletters that or other subscriptions rather that you would suggest people look into?
Definitely. I subscribe to KYC 360. They were formerly called Riscreen, if anyone is familiar with them, but they're really good at doing a weekly newsletter, and it covers anything from sanctions, AML failings, to what may be coming down the pipeline. I subscribe to AML Cube. That's a really good one. It could be found on LinkedIn, and then the newsletters are emailed to you. I also take time to read Wolfsburg Guidance. Wolfsburg, they do a lot of really good publications in layman terms. So it's very easy for anyone not with a compliance background to understand in terms of really good hot topics, the risk-based approach, suspicious activity reporting, ongoing monitoring. So because compliance is so demanding, sometimes mentally it could feel mentally disorienting because there's so much going on and you're trying to stay on top of everything. But there are a lot of tools out there to help you. So don't try to feel like you have to go and figure out what I need to read today. Um, and I do a lot of readings on the weekend. It's
That's going to be
very
my question. How do you schedule time?
It's impossible to do reading during the week, during the work day. So I
Mhm.
usually make the time on the weekends. I am an iPad girly, so I have my iPad with me and I download FSC newsletters. When I go on these websites, if they have an article to read, I'll download it on my iPad and make time to do the reading on the weekends. But there's so much resources out there. I also encourage people to read the news, BBC, see what's going on in the US, because a lot of geopolitical events do have an impact on this industry. So subscribe to things that are interesting to you, and you have to make time intentionally to read them. And I think that's important. You have to make the time.
That's excellent. Um, there's something else I is going back to the earlier conversation, and something I've experienced is also where persons maybe have joined a team and they want to do compliance and then realize, and I've heard this, I don't like compliance. And I think what we have to appreciate is that it's okay if you're getting into it and you don't really know what it is. It is one of those things that when you're starting, it may end up getting very mundane because if it is you're going to start, and just as Sinead did with her journey, if you recall, she said she asked her manager at the time to train me like a junior analyst. You need to know, and it is best that you know every piece of the chain. You need to know how to do the screenings, how to look at passports. You know, all of this may seem very basic, but it's part of the building block as you go through your career. And don't just see it as this is something that's boring. This is where you then decide, well, what is my next step? What do I now need to layer on top of this so that I'm learning more? Whether it's now, okay, getting into policy drafting, because with the policy drafting, you can bring in the practical sides that you learned with the screening and the actual protocols to see, well, how do you draft it in policy? Then going into governance. So I would say give it a fair chance because we're also trying to get more people in the industry, you know, develop further on in the industry, you know, give it a fair chance. And how would you say that you approached it, maybe even with your managers in terms of moving up? So it might be like, okay, I want another challenge because there might be people on the call too who maybe feel stuck with where they're at and well, I want to do something different. How do you think they can represent themselves to their head of compliance or director to show that I am ready for the next step?
That's a really good one. I think one of the most important things people have to realize is that you have to own your own journey and your destiny is not up to your employer. And it's a 50-50 relationship. And that's something that I tell my team all the time. When you come or when I come into a job, I'm going to give my best. I'm going to give my best, and I'm going to see what roles or opportunities for growth there are within the organization. And the employer also has a duty to chart, and not for you as an individual, but kind of be transparent in terms of the growth opportunities within the firm. I think people have to own their career journeys, and they have to give, it's a 50-50 relationship, and you have to meet your employer halfway. And I do understand that compliance is repetitive, that sometimes you don't want to look at a passport today or screen these Chinese names. I do get it. But I understand as well that you have to own it, and you have to say, what do I want from this? And as I mentioned earlier, there are many different career paths. When I came on to Harney's in 2016, I knew what their plan was. I started as the deputy, and their plan was to appoint me as a compliance officer eventually. So I personally did everything that I needed to do to make sure that I was ready for when I became the compliance officer. In actuality, I was a bit scared, and one of my very close friends could tell you, I told her, I don't know if I could do this compliance officer job. It seems to be too demanding, flustered, and I said, I don't know if I could do it. And she said to me, your experience, everyone has their own experience, and you're doubting your abilities. So I also had to mentally prepare to be ready to be the appointed CEO. So for those persons who, and also for those persons who want to do something different, I think it's very important to have those discussions with your supervisor, your manager. We're not mind readers. And I always tell the team, I ask them, do you like this? Do you want to make a career out of this? Or is this just a job for you? Because I completely get that. I get that there's some persons we just need to pay the bills. That's really why we work. We want to make money to live a particular lifestyle and be able to do things. And there are some persons where compliance is their career and their passion, and there are some persons who this is just a job. And I encourage people to have those conversations with me, because I can have an impact in how your career is chartered and where I focus your efforts. I have staff members that have said, I want to focus on risk management. I don't want to be a compliance officer, Shane. I want to be a risk manager, and I want to be exposed to risk. So when things come up within the portfolio or tasks need to be delegated, I am going to give this particular person something that's more risk focused. And then those that say, I want to be a compliance officer, I want to take over when you go into another role, or if you leave Harney's, then when again those opportunities come up, I give them the exposure. So I think for persons that think that it's repetitive and you feel like you're doing the same thing and you don't know where to go, I think you have a responsibility to speak with your manager, and help, and and inform them of what you want out of the journey while you're with a particular firm. But you as an individual, you also have a duty to do your own research and see what certifications and career opportunities are out there.
That's excellent. And exactly what you said, it's really up to you to also do the research to see it's such a dynamic field. When I started compliance, we didn't have like separate risk management, etc. The head compliance officer, you did everything. And in terms of hands in doing everything. But now the roles have evolved. But what you'd have to bear in mind for everyone on the call, as you go higher up, you may not have to be an expert at everything, but you definitely have to be aware of everything that's happening to make those strategic decisions, and then delegate to the teams. So it's really important, because now the landscape has really changed. You can become specialized in the area that you are passionate about, but it's also important when approaching your management that in identifying the passion, also have a roadmap. Sometimes what I've seen, it's I'm passionate about this, and it's just left at your lap. Okay, so what are the things you then want to explore? It's we the employer also can't be the one trying to figure out and do it all. So come with a plan. And I would say the good thing now is to speak up. Speak up of but when you're speaking up, I think you also come from a place of evidence, fact based. I've been doing X. I think I've excelled at this. I'm now interested in this. I've done this research, and this is now the direction I want to go. And also for seasoned professionals, you may have been compliance officer for years. You can ask for head compliance if you don't have a head compliance. Ask for your role. At one stage in my career, I remember going to my MD and said, I've been doing X and I think my role should be Y. And this is why I think so. And the role didn't exist, but I justified the reason why. So I'm giving this as a background, as we're giving this information so people also don't feel that there's a glass ceiling. You, as you've said, you can chart your own career path. Just do your research, speak to other people around so that you can have that confidence to make the bold moves, but just ensure, you're doing it the right way as well. Now, as a relatively young person, how did you navigate the challenges of your youth? Sometimes when I speak to Shanae too, it's not, you've really done a remarkable job at your age. So how have you navigated the challenges of your youth, both overseeing personnel, which we've looked at how you've done that, and I'm sure managing teams with people much older than you, but also, having a seat at the board is also quite challenging as well. So let's start with you now getting your seat and place at the board. So twofold. And I'm not saying this is what happened at Honey's at all. This is just generally what I can imagine. First, you come in, seat at the board. Oh, we have compliance at the board now, revenue. Everyone's just going to be trying to shoot us down. Some people may say, no, of course not. We're embracing it. And then we have this younger person who's coming with AI and all of this stuff. We've been doing these systems this way for all of these years and it's worked. And you're now coming with all of this new strategy. How are you managing and how have you managed that?
My youth, well, has been at the forefront for quite some time. Navigating leadership and being in a very senior role at a young age, it came with its own perceptions and experiences. I remember one day I was wearing my hair in a particular hairstyle, and one of my colleagues said, "You look so youthful." I think she wanted to tell me that I look like a child, but she said, "You look so youthful." And it was a reminder that youth and even appearance can sometimes shape how others perceive your readiness to lead. So I navigated that in a few ways. And I would say it was very simple. I demonstrated that I was competent. I focus on being excellent at what I do. That crying moment made sure that I became a subject matter expert thoroughly. There wasn't anything that I didn't know. And if I didn't know, I was going to figure it out. And I made it intentional to add value in every space I was in. And I think once people see your capability and your consistency, my age became less and less relevant, even at a board level. But beyond the technical skills, is something that I alluded to earlier. I made a deliberate effort to work on emotional intelligence. It's unfortunate that emotional intelligence isn't something that they teach us in school, but understanding and managing my emotions and learning how to respond to my emotions and those of others. Because look, sometimes we know even at board level or you're in certain meetings and things are being said and decisions are being made and you're very upset. And it's really recognizing how to respond to those types of situations has a lot to do with emotional intelligence, especially when it came to leading persons older than me, who may have thought as well because of my youth that I was not competent. And I think I spent a lot of time understanding personalities, understanding what motivated my board. I spoke about the business acumen. At the end of the day, we're in a business, and one of the most important things for that business is making money and bottom line. So it was seeing how could compliance position itself to be a strategic partner alongside the business. And communication styles as well. I think all of those things are just as important as knowing the regulations. And I spent a lot of time with managing directors, um, as I said, understanding the business's goals and what it wanted to achieve and how I could help the business achieve those goals while staying compliant. And I think when you do that, you earn trust and you earn credibility at every level in the organization. So even with the receptionist and all the way to the C-suite executives.
That's important, as you've said, earning that credibility. So I did get a question. It's a more technical question looking at preparing for an on-site inspection. And of course, you are a very good person to answer this because I'm pretty sure you've gone through quite a few inspections. So for a CO, what are some just maybe three practical tips you can say on how to prepare for an on-site inspection? Maybe you've just gotten into the role as an approved compliance officer. You've gotten that FSC request, the MD has called you in to say that we have gotten an inspection notice. Walk us through. Let's use it from a perspective of it's first time approved as a compliance officer, because I do have a few persons on who I know have recently been approved to those roles.
So yes, I've been through an inspections and we actually had one this year and we were excited about it. So, first time I would definitely say if I'm a first time compliance officer entering into a new organization and entering into this role, one of the key things I'd want to read is the last inspection report or the last internal audit report because I need to understand what are the issues, if there are any. Sometimes there may be something that could need improvement. So I really want to look at what was the last inspection report or even the last most recent internal audit report. And I think that's where you start and then you work your way back. When we were preparing for our inspection, it was a bit interesting because I knew we were getting one. I just didn't know when they were going to come knocking, but they didn't come knocking in a long time. So I kept telling the team, we're going to get inspected and we have to be ready. We have to be ready. We have to be ready. So they could tell you in team meetings, I kept talking about we're going to get inspected and we have to be ready. And we were ready. And that's because one, always have a plan. I always have a plan. In life, you're taught, even in your personal life, you're taught to have a plan A, B, C, or D. And I think you have to prepare for an inspection long before you get the inspection notice. Um, and that helps you with reducing stress when the notice comes, and then you could pivot your teams quickly and see who you need to redirect to certain areas. I'd also say develop your own internal audit process. I'm not waiting. We're not waiting for anyone to come and tell us what's wrong. And when I'm saying anyone, I'm even talking about our own internal audit function because some licensees have to have their own internal audit function. So we have developed our own internal compliance audit function where we're checking ourselves before the internal auditor or the regulator could come and tell us what may be missing. Three, I would say continuously review and update your policies and procedures. Don't underestimate how important it is to do that throughout the year. And don't wait until the inspection notice to go and update your SAR policies or your regulatory compliance manual or your onboarding policies. Do that whether every 6 months or if someone has raised an issue when reading those policies or you've found a gap when you're doing your own internal testing, use that as a time to address the policies because that's either a good indication that there's been a breakdown in your control. So one of the managers on my team, she's constantly, we need to review this policy. We need to make sure it's up to date. So when we got that inspection notice, we were ready. We weren't there scrambling, trying to update myriad and a variety of policies and procedures. We were ready. And I also say my last thing, I know you said three, but
No, that's
would
fine.
be to I have two more. have an inspection team within your team, because even when you get an inspection notice, as I said, you have to be able to pivot, but the work is still going on. So you still have to be able to do BAU as usual. So identify persons within your team that's going to keep the cog running and that you're going to take away to help focus on the needs of the inspection. And I also say to communicate with your regulator, especially if you're a new compliance officer getting into the role.
Mhm.
Call the FIA. Let them know who you are. Introduce yourself. Um, Speak to the regulator, your regulator, if you're supervised by the FSC, and have a really open and transparent communication with the regulator. I know there's certain provisions under the regulatory code where you could make certain disclosures. If you've identified a gap, even if you don't think that it's significant, let the regulator know so that when the inspection comes, you could own that narrative, they're fully aware, and you're not caught out. And those would be my tips in terms of being inspection ready.
Those are excellent because very practical as well. And I'm happy you also share the approach of um, being open with the regulator. Of course, it's within reason, but when you can be open strategically where you're being open, you're identifying what may be an issue, but then you've also at the same time saying, however,
You're
these are the
addressing it.
controls we have in place. Because exactly what you said, you find, the regulator then feels, all right, this firm, we know they're proactive. We're not wondering, well, what's going on inside of her because there is that level of proactiveness. What I would say, and as you know, when you do go to the regulator, just ensure key things. This is the issue. This is what has been done. This is the controls put in place to remediate it, manage it, and to ensure it doesn't happen. But I am the type of compliance officer who I prefer to disclose the right way
Agreed.
because it has never led me, never led me wrong because it's a much more challenging position to be in when the regulator approaches you. And it's really even more challenging to then, at that point, you can't say, well, I knew, but I wasn't sure, where's the record keeping? You should have just maybe said something.
I have to agree, Shamini. I think when you're open with the regulator, as you say, within reason, it also helps you to control your narrative. And I've found in my experience when we write to the regulator and say, we have this gap, this is why we have this gap, this is what we're doing to address this gap, and we will update you whether on a periodic basis or whatever schedule the regulator decides, you really have no issues. So I do agree with that, you know, transparency with the regulator.
I have, before I close with some inspirational questions I'm going to get from you, responses rather, I do have one more technical question, which would be with a compliance manual. So as you've mentioned, you are updating it a few times in the year. So, you've just updated your compliance manual, a series of amendments have now come out. How do you suggest just practically scheduling? Is it an approach of you're quickly making those updates, getting board approval, and bothering the board or whichever committee constantly? Or you're keeping an open document with track change versions as you insert updates and then you choose a defined period when you're getting it approved? Because I know that is, one of the challenges that different institutions face.
Good question. I'd say the approach depends. So, and I'll give two separate answers. The first being, it depends on what the changes are and the severity of those changes. And if those changes have an impact on a policy approach or policy decisions, and when I say policy, if they're going to have an impact on day-to-day work, then those changes may need to be approved by the board sooner rather than later. So I think it really depends on what the changes are and the impact that those changes have on day-to-day processes, systems, applications. If but after you've done that assessment, if it's something that isn't an urgent need, then our approach and my approach is usually to have all of those updates done in one go and in preparation for the next board meeting. So I'm hoping that most firms have quarterly and regular board meetings with the board. So you have a running document of all the changes that you need your board to approve. If, as I said, they're not substantial and they don't have a immediate impact on something that you're doing on a daily basis, then we table all of them at the next board meeting. One tip that we like to do is give the board a summary of the changes because let's be real, board members they're not going to read your 50-page compliance manual. They've trusted you as a compliance officer, the compliance function, the managers, etc. They're trusting you to be the experts in this and then decide how these regulatory changes have an impact on our operations and what decisions we need to make. So what we do is, in addition to sharing the board a redlined version of the manuals and the policies that we're updating, I find it's very useful to give a summary, and it's usually a one-page, two-page summary because your board of directors, they're very busy, they're making a lot of decisions. And I have found that they tend to read that summary and they'll ask me questions rather than me just sending a 50-page document with so many track changes.
Okay, excellent. So we're just about time at the closing of our time. So this would be a very important question for me as well in seeking that for you, that answer for you. What keeps you inspired about compliance? And like, what is your why?
I am laughing and smiling because there's so many responses to that question. So I think it's provocative because the answer is layered.
Mhm.
One of my whys is the ecosystem of compliance professionals that have influenced or mentored or helped to identify their strengths and weaknesses. I want people to leave better than when they started. And even if they join Harneys, I always tell them, I want you, and if you go on to another firm, I want you to leave better than when you came through these doors. And because of that, I'm committed to pouring into my peers and others who share the same passion. I invest a lot of time in training. I have an open door policy. Come and ask me any question. And if you don't understand the question and you need me to explain it to you 10 times in 10 different ways, I will do that. So that ecosystem of compliance professionals who are passionate or who like the field or who want to see if it's for them, I'm committed to them and pouring into them
Mm.
and believing in them just like how someone believed in me 9 years ago and betted on me when I joined the regulated side, and she had no obligation to do that. And I'll also say my why is tied to the Virgin Islands. Compliance is a critical role in our industry. No two ways about that. And using my expertise and my skills to strengthen the BVI is a duty that I take very seriously. As I said earlier, I thought I was going to be a big financier, but sometimes we're called to something greater. And my passion for compliance was a conscious choice that positioned me to serve my islands in a very meaningful way. So even after 11 years, I know there's still a lot of room to grow. And because of that, it keeps me driven and learning and sharpening my skills every single day. So I'll say that my inspiration comes from service to the people, service to my profession that I love dearly, and service to my country.
That's excellent, Shanae. I feel very inspired, and I'm going to go out on a limb and, say that I'm pretty sure you'll also be open to people on the call, reaching out via LinkedIn. Shanae is a wealth of knowledge, and you really gave us an inspirational message today. So thank you for that. And this is really, what the Toolbox series was about, both the technical side and also to empower persons by showcasing the talent. And I'm really happy that I could have launched the Careers in Compliance with you. I feel you've really set the tone and inspired not just the participants, you've inspired me, rejuvenated that inspiration for me. I'm getting a lot of thank yous. I'm getting a lot of messages, by the way. Just, very thank you. I don't want to start reading everyone. Very happy, very
That's fine,
impressed.
Shamini.
I'll send you all the messages.
That's fine. That's
Um,
fine.
so to the rest of the team and the participants, thank you for joining. This was the first in our Careers and Compliance series. And we'll also do, different careers. Next year, we'll probably look at, career in VASP and then maybe a career with a regulator. Also, in terms of things that are happening with Gold Leaf, in a few weeks, well, actually by tomorrow, you should see on our LinkedIn page, as you may know, our courses are now CPD accredited. And I am going to be running a higher level practitioner style course on the 5th of December and 12th of December. And this is really geared towards the professionals, the practitioners in the field who are trying to ensure you've either satisfied your CPD requirements or you're looking for that practitioner level style. I'm also hoping from this call that we've also motivated the compliance professionals for us to get back to the stage that existed in the beginning when I started compliance in the BVI, where we can call in on each other and get advice, and because it's good to get different perspectives. So I would really like for us to get back to that stage. And this series will allow us to showcase the talents of different people that I'm pretty sure they'll be open to you reaching out to them. So thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing most of the practitioners at our next CPD course in a few weeks, and wishing everybody a good Friday and a great weekend ahead.
Thank you, Shamini. Same to you and everyone else.
Yeah.